Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 140th meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you, everyone who has been a veteran of this process, and welcome to newcomers who are joining us for the first time. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. And just to start off every meeting, I do like to remind people why we created this forum 140 weeks ago, which was to unite the international peace movement. And many people who have been in the peace movement for a long time know that it has been very difficult to bring people together of differing ideas and philosophies. But what we're saying is if we actually intend to defeat evil in the world and create a real world of true peace, then we have to connect all of the people we can and coordinate our activities. So whatever philosophy, religion, nation, culture you're coming from, if that is your mission, then you are welcome here. And we have a dialogue process to discuss our initiatives. Please take a moment to share this invitation with your organizations, with your friends, or your reasonable enemies. Please invite them on for this very important dialogue process today. We do have a lineup of excellent leaders, speakers from around the world to discuss a number of important topics. But to start us off, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, hello to all of you. I think the world is in an extremely precarious situation because as of yesterday, the New START treaty expired. And while there are contradictory reports about what is now going on, are there negotiations between the United States and Russia or not? Axios was reporting from 3 unnamed sources that there would be such discussions. However, President Trump had put earlier on his Truth Social that he was not in favor of picking up on the offer of President Putin to extend the New START treaty by 1 year. He said, why don't we have our experts work on a completely new, beautiful treaty? So it is very unclear. In any case, what the overall situation obviously is that after half a century of the effort to have different kinds of arms control treaties, what we are seeing is more or less a breakdown of all of such efforts and actually the whole international order. We had the famous or infamous admission of Mark Carney at Davos that the rules-based order was a fraud from the beginning, that it was just a cover story to cover up for a double standard. We had the admission of President Trump in his interview with the New York Times on January 7th that he does not need international law. We have an unconclusive situation in respect to all the different crisis spots, Ukraine. The situation around Iran remains one of extreme uncertainty. On the one side, President Trump has proudly declared that a big armada has been amassing in the Gulf region. Apparently, there were forces in the Pentagon who were not so enthusiastic about that because they said that it's overstretching the US armed forces, especially the Navy part of it, because some of these carriers should be in the Pacific according to the recent security doctrines. And now they're being sent to the Gulf, and that overstretches the situation. Then naturally, the expectations, what would happen if there would be a new strike against Iran, that Iran would be in a position to deliver an even much stronger counterstrike against not only US forces in the region, but also against Israel with unforeseeable consequences. Then naturally, we have to note the fact that despite the ceasefire in Gaza, the genocide is absolutely continuing. Since that so-called ceasefire, more than 550 people in Gaza were killed, 1,500 wounded. The overall living condition in the winter are absolutely horrifying, as they are in Ukraine, by the way. So the situation in the world remains one of absolute desperation and worry, where should this all really end? But I think the most important question actually is what will happen? You have Chancellor Merz, who is just touring the Gulf states involved in major arms sales, as if that would be something the world needs in return, naturally, for trying to diversify his buying of energy of various kinds. But that doesn't help the German industry, because the German economy is in a free fall, in a state of collapse. And the German Association of Small and Medium Industries just put out a letter to Merz saying actually that while they had hoped with enthusiasm that the new government of Merz would bring about a change, now they have to look in horror that the German economy is completely collapsing. And also, naturally, we have the pending Damocles sword of a crash, of a real significant systemic crash, which was preluded by a mini crash, if one can call it that way, namely that some of the speculators decided to cause an artificial little crash of the precious metals. So gold collapsed by 11%, silver by 31%, other metals, similar figures, and wiping out really incredible large amounts of assets. And this is important because gold and silver are not just usual commodities. They are normally in the financial system that which is supposed to be the guarantee against inflation, against speculation. And when they become the object of massive speculation themselves, it gives you a taste where we are. Naturally, the Bitcoin market is collapsing as well. So what is really looming is a potential collapse of the entire financial system of more than 2.4 quadrillion outstanding debt, which, in this extreme moment of instability could trigger a chaotic, uncontrollable situation. And this is why, the renewed efforts to re-establish international law, what we have started to do with our EIR emergency session on January 12th, where we got together important individuals from different countries from all over the world to basically say we have to fight to re-establish international law based on the UN Charter. The United Nations obviously need reform, but we cannot replace it because it's the only forum where all the nations of the world are represented. But we have to move beyond that. We have to urgently establish a new security and development architecture, which must take care of the interest of every single country on the planet, or it does not work. So the big question actually is absolutely, is humanity capable of giving itself a system of governance which prevents the annihilation of the human species, which would be the certain result if it ever comes to the use of nuclear weapons? And that is the big issue. We will organize our initiative by trying to pull together an even bigger conference on the 2nd of March, hopefully involving many top-level government officials, former government officials, think tanks, universities, to discuss seriously this option of a new security and development architecture, a new global governance system, which is absolutely required if all of these regional conflicts are not in danger of going out of control and bringing about the end of the world. Now, there is one big problem in our effort, and that is that the recent revelations, ongoing, escalating revelations about the so-called Epstein files, where now the latest batch was 3.5 million documents involving obviously thousands and thousands of individuals from many countries, almost most countries of the world. And it brings forward something which has been characterized by Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, as a cesspool, as a rat-infected corner, as a swamp. And naturally, if so many people in top positions, in government positions, in other leading positions, have been involved in not only a ring of pedophilia and rape and forced prostitution of minors and other women, but obviously this is all linked to business deals, to dirty business, to probably money laundering, to weapon smuggling, and obviously it involves a lot of the Anglo-American control of that empire. Now, the recent effort was to all say, oh no, this is all Russia. Naturally, Putin was involved, which is quite ridiculous because the only Russians who have popped up in terms of their name were Khodorkovsky and Ponomarev, and these are people who have fled Russia, who are part of the oligarchical faction who is trying to topple Putin since a while. In any case, this whole swamp which has emerged, I mean, the questions we have to answer is, it reminds one very much of what happened in Italy with the Operation Clean Hands, where a system of known corruption, which dominated the Italian party system in the entire post-war period, the so-called amici di amici way of doing things, the mafia involvement, the corruption, nepotism, all of this was part of the Italian system, how the parties functioned. And then at a certain point, the secret services decided they would blow it all up to totally dismantle the entire party structure, to put in a new party system with new people. And one cannot, avoid the idea that something like that, which by the way was attempted in Brazil again against Lula and others, one cannot avoid the thought that there may be something behind this Epstein operation like that. So we should really watch out. Is this going to lead to a real renewal of the system, a clean out of these practices, or is it just another restructuring for keeping control, like the statement by Mark Carney in Davos about the so-called rules-based order being a fraud, where he tries now to replace it with some other geopolitical arrangement? I think we need something much more fundamental. We need a true cultural renaissance. We need to go back to the values where man is not regarded as an animal which has to be controlled by some leviathan, some dictatorship, because man is evil by nature. But we have to create a renaissance where we connect the best traditions of each culture with a positive perspective of the future. Because if we do not do that, especially in the West, where that has been absent, the Asian countries have been doing that by evoking the 5,000 or more years of cultural continuity with an optimistic perspective of the future. In the West, there has been only cover-up pragmatism, and therefore, we are still in this incredible cultural crisis we are facing today. So I think we need, maybe we should add to the security and development architecture a cultural architecture, because unless we go back to the best traditions of the American Revolution, which now has its 250th anniversary, and which unfortunately has been forgotten by most living Americans today. And in Europe, likewise, we have to go back to the Italian Renaissance, the German classical period, and likewise in other cultures in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, to bring back the best traditions. Because if we do not have such a cultural renewal, I do not think that we will mobilize the moral force to get mankind in a better era. So that's what I wanted to say in the beginning. And now let's hear from other speakers, especially Diane Sayre.
Thank you very much, Helga, for that opening. And I want to just underline this Operation Clean Hands and make sure people are thinking about that for the discussion period, that if there are thoughts on that, please share with us, or if you have anything to contribute in terms of analysis from other people, please let us know. So thank you very much, Helga. Next, I'd like to go to Diane Sayre, who is an independent United States presidential candidate, and she just is coming off of a very important press conference, which was held yesterday at 4 with Scott Ritter on the ending of the START treaty, which is very, very important for discussion right now. Please go ahead, Diane.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And also ably moderated by Garland Nixon, whom we may hear from later today. I'll just say, picking up on where Helga left off on the urgency of reminding people that we are not animals. And what I took up at the beginning, because after the release of these Epstein files, what struck me very forcefully were the comments of General Douglas MacArthur made on the battleship USS Missouri in his radio address after the Japanese surrendered. He and many of our military did not agree with dropping nuclear bombs on Japan. They knew Japan was in the process, the emperor was in the process of negotiating the terms of surrender. There was no military purpose for that massive destruction and slaughter of civilians, but Churchill's design to prepare for a preemptive nuclear war against the Soviet Union later. So MacArthur, who had not yet seen Hiroshima and Nagasaki before he made that address, nonetheless, had been informed of the incredible destruction of these bombs. And therefore, in his speech, he said, look, this war is now over, but so far mankind has not figured out some way to resolve their differences other than war. And he said, we have now had our last chance, that unless the quality of the human character can catch up with our incredible advances in science, we are doomed. And I thought, as far as we were immoral and culturally not developed when we dropped the nuclear bombs on Japan in 1945, how much more depraved are we today? And you have today the incredible advances in AI and other areas, and in medicine as well, which can be of great service to mankind, or given our depraved state, can lead to total destruction. So I think that we have to consider this very deeply. We cannot let go of this, especially in the United States, in a republic where the American people are responsible for the actions of our government. And we must hold ourselves to the same standard as the German people were held to after Hitler knew or should have known. Saying you did not know is not an excuse. Now, from that standpoint, I made 3 policy proposals which should be adopted had we a sane president in the United States. Number one, that the United States should immediately declare no first use of nuclear weapons. Just forget the idea that we might use it, we have to do this in order to have stability, or you're leaving an ambiguity hanging out there that opens all kinds of doors. China already has this policy. They've had this policy since the beginning of their nuclear weapons program. Russia had formerly had that, but had to alter it because of the provocations of the West. And then you have the other nuclear armed nations, France, England, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and let us not forget Israel, which no one mentions. All should be held to that standard. Secondly, you can't, in a sense, even begin to get on the right path unless you do what Helga has been saying repeatedly, which is we need a new paradigm. We need a new architecture of relations among nations, which respects equally the sovereignty of nations and the nature of man as a perfectible being. Not that we will ever be perfect, but we can continually improve ourselves, which is really the point, I would think, of what each of us wants to do and what you would want for your children and grandchildren. And then finally, I just laid out two very concrete proposals for the United States and Russia to work on together to reestablish trust, but which would also be of enormous economic benefit to both of our nations and to the planet as a whole, namely that we finally launch the construction of the Bering Strait Tunnel, which will completely change our orientation from the dead currently approach of Europe, which is related to the dead approach, the entropic approach of the United States toward Asia. And number two, strategic defense of Earth, which was proposed by Dmitry Rogozin when he was the Russian ambassador to NATO in 2011. But it is, in fact, an echo of Lyndon LaRouche's original proposal, which he began working on in 1979 and was taken up by Reagan but never implemented due to, one, the Soviets rejecting it, and two, I would say, being hijacked by various neocons in the United States who perverted it into smart pebbles and stupid things, which were not what Lyndon LaRouche outlined, which was a science driver to be developed by both nations, which would be of immense economic benefit to both the Soviet Union and the United States, and make nuclear weapons obsolete by developing a superior technology that was defensive. So Rogozin then, all those many years later, proposed that the United States and Russia collaborate to address something that actually is a threat, about which we don't know very much, frankly, which is an asteroid or a meteor striking our planet and wiping out a city, a continent, half of the planet, the entire planet, as happened 65 million years ago. And frankly, I would say we know so little about the universe that we don't even know, is the next asteroid another 30 million years away? I mean, of that size, or is it closer? But it would make sense to me if we were prudent and if we love the music of Beethoven and the writings of Shakespeare, and we think these things should be preserved, then we should be working on figuring out what to do about it. So just finally, I will say there was some important press coverage, which I would like to share if I may. Is that
Please
possible? No. Oh, it is. Okay, great. Which came out in TASS, which is the Russian government newspaper, and I'll just show this article. U.S. presidential candidate Trump should have accepted Putin's New START proposal. Diane Sayre stated that U.S.-Russian relations have suffered enormous damage over the past 13 years. And what I think was particularly notable about the TASS coverage is in a second article They make reference of my association to Lyndon LaRouche, who is very highly regarded in Russia, as I think Helga knows and has experienced with her own work. They say Sayre was a close associate of Lyndon LaRouche for 32 years, an American economist and nonconformist politician, author of the so-called theory of physical economy and opponent of monetarist concepts. LaRouche positioned himself as a friend of Russia, considered it one of the key players on the world stage, and claimed that Russia, along with China, India, and the USA, and a number of other countries, could save the world from the greatest crisis in history. LaRouche ran for president of the United States 8 times. He first ran in 1976 and subsequently participated in every presidential campaign until Bush's reelection in 2004. So I think there are people clearly looking for signs of intelligent life in the United States, and I think they are finding some, and hopefully they will not need a microscope, but will be able to see it from afar if we can grow and recruit. That's what I can report for now.
Excellent. That is excellent. Thank you, Diane. I'm sure many people, there's actually a number of people I'm seeing on here who were on your press conference yesterday, so I'm sure they're very happy to see that. I am including your press release, which was put out this morning on the conference. That is in the chat. But if you were on any of the broadcasting channels and you're not in the Zoom chat, you can go to SayreForPresident.com, and on the bottom of the website, you'll find a post which has the press release on it for the February 5th press conference. So thank you very much, Diane, for highlighting this incredibly important treaty. I mean, we have to get something moving on this very, very quickly. So thank you very much. I'll including this again one more time. Okay, great. So next we're going to bring up a video clip from that press conference. Actually, we have a clip from Scott Ritter, which this was very, very useful, I think, for people to hear what the process has been on the creation of a nuclear arms treaty. So if we can pull that up from Scott Ritter, that would be fantastic.
I'm very proud to say that I was the first weapons inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union to implement the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and I helped write the book on on-site inspection. On-site inspection is a critical component of any compliance verification mechanism dealing with treaties. But again, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires negotiations. Rules have to be set out. Limits have to be defined by a treaty. The importance of this, just so people understand, in 2009, the original START Treaty, which was signed in July of 1991 between George Herbert Walker Bush and then Russian President or Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev, it expired in 2009. And this is what led to the negotiation of the New START Treaty. And there was concern on the part of the United States Senate about a gap in compliance verification. This is, again, how important it is to have these treaties. The Senate was comfortable with the Russian nuclear forces, strategic nuclear forces, because they were familiar with it because of the reports prepared by the inspectors. They knew how many Russian weapons they were, where they were, what kinds they were, and what the Russians were up to, generally speaking. And the opposite was true. The Russians were comfortable with the American strategic nuclear forces because they had inspectors doing the same work. Senator Lugar, who is the influential chair of the Senate Armed Forces Committee at the time, warned President Obama that if you have too much of a gap between the expiration of START and getting your New START treaty ratified, we will lose that confidence. And once we lose that confidence, we aren't going to be so inclined to sign on to a treaty because we won't have confidence in the numbers. Well, look what just happened today. The New START treaty has expired. It's done. It's finished. There's nothing left. Yes, as Garland said, there's some talk in Dubai between American negotiators and Russian negotiators about a potential 6-month extension. But let's be frank, even though the New START treaty expired yesterday, there hasn't been inspections related to the New START treaty since 2022. That's when the United States and Europe banned Russian aircraft from being able to leave Russia and come to the United States to bring the inspectors in. They were denied permission to fly through the airspace because of European sanctions. And the Russians said, okay, the reciprocal will be true, no American inspectors. So there's been no inspectors doing their job since 2022. That's 4 years. Now, since 2023, there's no data exchange. That means we have a huge gap. One of the things that I've been articulating for prior to the expiration was to get a rebaselining of the New START treaty, having inspectors go back and do the work. But Donald Trump wasn't willing to do that either. So even though we have people talking today, we have a 4-year data gap that's going to be almost impossible to bridge, which means we're starting from scratch. And we're starting from scratch at a time when the United States appears to be on the cusp of, increasing the size of our strategic nuclear arsenal. That was the whole reason for us allowing New START to expire, so that we could build more nuclear weapons or deploy more nuclear weapons to counter a perceived Chinese threat. Now, Donald Trump is talking about a grand bargain, but a grand bargain doesn't happen overnight. The complexity of trying to do a trilateral agreement and understanding if you're going to bring the Chinese into the mix, you got to bring the French and British into the mix, and they haven't even been approached yet. This is pie in the sky stuff. And who trusts the United States anymore? Nobody wants a deal. A deal can be broken. A treaty is binding. We need a treaty, but we no longer have people capable of negotiating this treaty. Nobody trusts American negotiators. We are literally in a vacuum, a deficit of trust at a time when we need arms control more than ever. I want to remind people that in 2024, the CIA briefed the United States Congress that there was a better than 51% chance that there could be a nuclear war between the United States and Russia in 2024. At the Cuban Missile Crisis, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy and his advisors believed that the 30 to 40% chance. That's the Cuban Missile Crisis, which has been called the most dangerous period in the nuclear era. In November 2024, the CIA said better than 50% chance. That's the world we live in today. And worse off, at that time, the Biden administration said they're ready to fight a nuclear war. The insanity is real, and we no longer have a treaty to control the insanity, to contain the insanity. What we need is leadership that has a vision of arms control, that believes in real arms control, not a deal, but the hard work of sitting down and making the world safer. And I believe that leader is Diane Sare.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Scott Ritter. We'll definitely make sure that portion of Scott's presentation from the press conference is available to people. We'll find a link for people to be able to use that. But thank you very much. That was former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter. And we shall continue with our agenda. So next, I'd like to go to Garland Nixon, who is a veteran progressive radio and television talk show host. You were the moderator for the event yesterday at the press conference on the New START treaty. And thank you so much for joining us, Garland. You are a wealth of knowledge and a fantastic analyst. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Certainly. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak as always. And, yes, I'm a journalist and all of those things, but my area of expertise, my specialty, and it's critical for this particular conversation, is in law enforcement. And I did a number of things, but not the least of which being was I ran an investigations division, and I did training. I trained investigators, taught people how to investigate. So I see things as an investigative journalist and as a law enforcement investigator. And the reason I say that—
Pardon me, Garland, I'm sorry. Your volume is just a little low.
Let me see. Perhaps I can turn my gain up. Is that a little better?
That's a little better, yes.
Let me turn it up more. How about now? Is it improving?
It's improving, yes.
There we go. All right. Okay. Is this
That's
okay?
much better.
All right.
Better.
Excellent. All right. I think I have it in my settings turned down a bit low. Anyway, my point is about all of that is about the Epstein stuff. And I tell you why. Because I look at the Epstein, I think that we have to, there are a number of ways to look at the Epstein release. One of them is to be, kind of upset and say, oh my gosh, they have all this power and they're doing these things and there's nothing we can do about it and we're in a terrible condition. The other way to look at it is through the eyes of an investigator. Number one, I'll say this: We have to have some level of skepticism. We have to understand that this is a controlled release, that they are going to, don't jump on everything and say, aha, I know that's true, and therefore, right? Understand that there is going to be a controlled release, and that even that some of the things that are when they are released, they will attempt to amplify some things, tamp down the other things. I think Dave, if I'm not mistaken, has something that he can put up. Dave DeBro. Hopefully. There we go. So one of the things that I thought was interesting was that Alexander Mercouris in England had a discussion on the Duran. See, I have my Duran hat on, one of my favorite programs. But he talked about the connections between Epstein and the British Crown. And I think it's particularly important for this organization because over the course of the years, this organization has been one of the groups worldwide who has presented a major focus on the British Crown and on the British Empire's input in world affairs, and has been attacked and belittled for it. But now I think we are coming to a time where, I'll put it like this, this is the time for this organization, because of the things they've been saying for so long. And now people's eyes are being opened, right? When we look at Epstein, there are a lot of what I will call investigative leads. Now, as I said, always have some level of skepticism. Would there be some things, is there going to be some things that are released that we might have to look at with a jaundiced eyes? Fair enough. But there are other things that we can see that I think are of great consequence as a result, as an example. Whenever someone tells me look in another direction, I know, okay, that's the direction I should be looking. One of the things that has happened recently, now this started 4 or 5 days ago with Sky News in Australia. And that was, they started saying, well, Epstein was actually a Russian spy. Had nothing to do with Israel. Well, by saying he had nothing to do with Israel, they're also trying to say he had nothing to do with the British Crown. We look at Lord Mandelson. We look at one of the people who he was a very, very important contact of his, which was Prince Andrew, which he was friends with, worked with Prince Andrew for a long time, and that tied him directly to the royal family. And we see that in trying to steer us away from Britain, to steer us towards Russia, that tells us that we need to look back towards Britain. And who's doing it? It's not the Americans. They didn't start off that. It's the same people who started with Russiagate in the same place, in the city of London, saying, look over here for Russia. It's Donald Trump. Now they're doing it with the, what could be, I'll even add this. The fact that it's being put forward as a Peter Mandelson scandal just now again focuses on one person. This is about Mandelson. It focuses away from the real power players, which is Prince Andrew, connecting Epstein directly to the royal family. And I think for this organization, that's where we really have to, one of the places we really have to look. I also think this, and if you look at it, I mean, for God's sake, Epstein's partner was Ghislaine Maxwell. And the Maxwells are connected again to the British power elite. So I think we have to look at this as an outstanding opportunity for those of us who are looking to follow these investigative leads. And it's not hard. You know, I've often shown people on my channel how to do it. Just start clicking, just start following names, just start searching names, just start looking, and things start to show up on their own. But what we're seeing now is an instance where the cat is out of the bag. And so people, you know, there was, I was on a Twitter Spaces recently with these people that did the Pizzagate thing. And they were all saying, they told us we were crazy when we said there's a worldwide group of pedophiles and they're doing all of these crazy things. And look, the conspiracy theorists have been, and the crazy people have been vindicated once again. And I think that in a different way, particularly with this organization, because my experience with this organization has been there's a tremendous focus on the connections to the British Crown. And even I was skeptical at first. But the more I looked, the more I started saying they're onto something here. And now I think the Epstein I've said this oftentimes, a lot of people know that my, political mentor was Paul Robeson Jr., and he's the one that actually directed me to this organization for intelligence, particularly. And one of the things that he always said was, it's not even what you say, Garland. It's when you say it. And you can say the same thing over and over, and no one will pay attention until the time is right. Right now, the time is right. And with the Epstein, for those who don't get upset or down in the mouth about it, for those who see this for the opportunity that it is to start digging into it, to start kind of crowing a little bit and saying, I told you so, and pointing more towards this, I think more and more people are opening their eyes to at least the possibility that those who have been pointing at the British Crown and pointing at MI6 and pointing at some of the underhanded things that have been going on, that we're at a good time. COVID, of course, was something that generated a lot of discontent and questioning of the elite ruling class. I think there are other things that can be brought up now, but I think that what we have to do as a community is pursue the investigative leads with, of course, a skeptical eye, but understanding that there's a lot there. There's a lot there. And I got to add this. Let's not forget, we only have like half of the documents. So we have to ask ourselves, gee, where's all of this other stuff? We have to keep pushing on that. We have to understand that if we can push, maybe we can get more released. And we can continue to pursue here. So I think personally, as an investigator, when you're an investigator, what do you want? You want leads. You're sitting there, any lead, you got a cold case. You're looking over anything you can to get a lead. Man, there's more leads than we could have ever dreamed of here. And so I think we have to start pursuing this leads and look at this for the great opportunity that it is, and in particular for this organization.
Thank you, Garland. That is fantastic. I think that this is very, very useful intelligence and leads for not only us, but the people who are watching in order to dig into this right now. What you pointed out about, I was just thinking about this, about the British trying to divert and just use this scandal. Oh yeah, Tony Blair, sure, he was in the thing, but we're not going to talk about him. We're just going to go after Mandelson and only talk about that right now. So anyway, there's a lot of questions like what you're bringing up that I'm asking. So I'd like to go to some of the panelists. I see a number of people have popped up. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had. So we'll go to discussion amongst the panelists for now, and then we'll open it up to questions with the audience afterwards. So let me go to Helga and see if you have a response or any thoughts so far.
No, I just would like to ask Garland the same question I was raising before, namely, about the parallels to the Italian clean hand operation and the similar effort to go against people in Brazil. Would you agree with the hypothesis that this may be a controlled release in order to still keep some of the structures or replace them with other structures still under control?
Well, I think everyone can hear me, right? I think there is no question that it is a controlled release. But it's still a release. So I'm going to say, though it's a controlled release, let's not, there's a lot of tremendous opportunities there, but I don't think it's a controlled release just for one particular purpose. I think this is a controlled release that had numerous purposes. However, I also think that once it got out of the bag, they lost control. I think there was a controlled release. I think there was a lot of pressure, and there may have been intent behind the controlled release, but I think they lost control, and I don't think they saw that coming.
To see if there's anybody else in the panel with thoughts or questions. I just also forgot to mention that we have one other item on the agenda, which I failed to put in the agenda, but we can get to that in a moment. But Diane, I see you've popped up.
I just would say I appreciate Garland's approach as an investigator to this. Having a history of investigating crime would give you a certain perspective on looking into these things. I think it does also underscore, again, Helga's point from the beginning about what is man. Are human beings animals or not? And if we are not, then what are the appropriate policies for human beings to ensure that we arrive at our maximum development? Because I think part of this crisis, not just, I mean, the sort of raw horror of the Epstein files and also what it implies for all of these networks and their various financial and foreign policy and other kinds of dealings. But how do you know then what is true? Where do you start? Because I think that in some way, this also, it could be used to really terrorize people. You know, when we got the photographs from Abu Ghraib in Iraq, I thought there's going to be a revolt. Americans are going to be surrounding the White House. George Bush will never be reelected. This is so unbelievable and horrible. And then I came to understand this. Was it Caligula who said, or Nero? I forget which one. Let them hate me, but let them fear me. Which was again what Leo Strauss was dealing with. The lie. We have so much power that we can tell you a lie that you know is a lie, and the way we're really going to scare you is we're going to make you feel powerless to refute it. And that's not actually how the universe works, and we can absolutely reject it. And we see it, actually, the rejection of that lie going on all over the vast majority of the planet, but not in our valley of the clueless where we live in the so-called civilized West.
If I may, and I think this is an important comment. This is very different from Abu Ghraib in that what they were able to do is just say the usual. Whenever an institution gets in trouble, they say there was a few bad apples at the bottom. You know, so whatever happened, there's always a few. It's always about fruit. There's a few bad apples at the bottom, and they did this, and we'll just clean out those few bad apples. This is different, and this is why this is unique and a unique opportunity. What is this crisis in reality? It is a crisis of legitimacy for the ruling elite. The legitimacy of their right to rule, of the moral foundation and substance of the elite. But it's not even really a crisis of legitimacy for them, because that has been decided. People can now look at that and say, they are not morally legitimate to lead. So now that we have a crisis of legitimacy it's clear the public opinion is, oh my God, I can't believe what these people are doing. That does something important, because those of us who have been arguing for literally centuries, they're not morally legitimate to lead. Now the question becomes, how do we react to it? Do we just let them drift on? How now do we take advantage of an opportunity? For hundreds of years, people have been saying, look at what King so-and-so's been doing, and look at what this person's been doing. And people knew it, but they didn't have the Epstein files. And now no one can deny this. So it is a crisis of legitimacy for the kind of globalist elite, for the noble class of nobility, as has never been seen in the Western world. And I think it becomes an opportunity for us. So now we have to ask ourselves, how do we take advantage of this unique opportunity that we may never see again, but it's here. So what do we do? And I think Diane running for office is a perfect example of how. Who knows? Because of what has happened, there are people that may say, well, okay, these people are completely mad. They're nuts. They're, degenerates. Let's look around. Oh my gosh, it's Diane Sayre. You see what I mean? So the question becomes now to ask ourselves, what work do we undertake to take advantage of an epochal opportunity?
Great, thank you. I saw you unmuted, Diane. I don't know if you were trying to say something.
No, but I think Helga may be.
Oh, Helga, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, we had in Germany a very interesting discussion following the briefing about the Epstein affair. Mainly, many of our supporters reacted to this 10th principle of my 10 principles, where I claim that man is good by nature and that all evil is the result of a lack of development, and therefore the good news is that it can be overcome by development, then people say, yeah, but does that not prove that, this principle is wrong and that man is evil? Look at these thousands and thousands of elite who are so degenerated. But it did not resolve the question in the minds of the people who were discussing this. But the new thing about it is that for the first time, people got out of their shell-shocked attitude and they said, no, this is a life and death issue. While normally people are small, they think that these powerful people do whatever they want and there's nothing you can do about it. I think this has sort of catapulted on the top of the agenda the issue of the nature of man. And I think, the initiative of the 12th of January that, we have to create a movement of world citizen, meaning, citizens all over the world who will take responsibility for the outcome of the destiny of their nation and humanity as a whole. This is a thought, which I think that is, in my view, the moment where the time is ripe for, where people grow up and become adults, and make America a republic again, because a republic is not just the president, the republic is the people. People have to become state citizens. And if we do that worldwide and catalyze, out of this discussion came even the idea that we have to spring up locals all over the place in the United States, but also in European countries, other countries, where people get together and say, we want to have a renaissance, we do not agree with this anymore. And we could turn this into a complete opposite. This could be the beginning of a world renaissance where people, shed off oligarchism, because that's what this is all about.
And one thing I would add, and that is, does it show that man is evil? Do we judge man by some 0.001% degenerates who are doing terrible things, or do we judge man by the other 99.099% that are being abused, and oppressed by these degenerates? So I would say it doesn't prove that man is inherently evil. It proves that man is being, overall, is being abused by a bunch of degenerates, and it's now, man's opportunity and duty to step up to the plate and say, okay, there are evil amongst us, but we'll deal with them.
Right. No, I think that's definitely the case. And people are always surprised to find out, what Helga had put forward as the 10th principle, and you get a really interesting response and explosion where people will say, well, I don't feel like I'm evil, but why is there evil going on in the world? And so it actually opens up a really important dialogue with people about what evil really is. And obviously what we're seeing with this Epstein file is an expression of how that comes about in the world. It's how empire is ruling.
And it goes to man has the capacity to be evil or good or whatever the case may be, too. That's the other part of it. The man has the capacity to choose the man. You know what I mean? That we have that in both sides of us, and that we have to recognize that we as human beings have the capacity to do terrible things. And when we recognize that we have the capacity to do it, it lessens the likelihood that we will. The worst person is that says, I'd never do anything wrong, I'm the good guy. Well, that's the person you better run from. We all have to, you know what I mean? It is a foundation for a great philosophical discussion. That's my point.
Well, there is such a thing as free will, and, everybody can decide to become a better human being, and you can decide to let the pig out, so to speak. I mean, that's the beauty about the universe, because if we did not have free will, we would not be, we would not be creative. We would not be in the image of the Creator, the imago viva Dei, the living image of God, as Cusanus calls it. So I think this idea of Leibniz, that we are living in the best of all possible worlds, implies the idea that every evil has the capacity to generate an even greater good if we decide to do it. And so I think it's a very interesting moment in history where the profound ideas about this can really become a replacement of the non-debate which took place for the last several decades in the public discourse.
I think so too. I know that Dennis Speed, you had something.
Yeah, it's the two things. One deals with what Garland was raising concerning the investigation, that being the person of Ghislaine Maxwell, but that's Robert Maxwell, and whether Epstein was essentially the replacement for Robert Maxwell. That's one question just to put to Garland, because that would tell us a lot. And it would not tell us a lot about the Israelis merely. It would tell us a lot about British intelligence. And, oh, my friend, everybody's getting interested. But that's not the main question. I had another question, Garland, because you said that you were directed toward LaRouche people by Paul Robeson Jr. Now, Paul Robeson Jr. was the son of the singer and very important political activist, Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was the one of the most important actors in American history who was blacklisted after a trip in 1949, which he took to the Soviet Union and other nations, warning about, or at the point that, something called Operation Drop Shot, which was an attempt to launch a preemptive strike or nuclear strike against the Soviet Union, which he had been briefed about. And he took his tour as a way of attempting to call attention, not to that operation because it was classified. You couldn't talk about it, but the idea that there had to be unity among people. Of course, that was itself, Operation Drop Shot was a successor to Operation Unthinkable, which was something that Churchill had tried to do in 1945, where he was talking at that time about the nuclear weapons being used against the Soviet Union. He wanted it done within months of May of 1945. He was actually looking to do it before the end of 1945 if they could do it. So could you say something, because I don't think people would know, the significance of Robeson Jr., Robeson also, and I know you had a proposal for a project you were thinking about in terms of calling or highlighting Paul Robeson's relationship to Russia. And I think you were discussing that to some degree in Russia. If you could just say a few things about this.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important to find ways to bring the anti-war message into various communities. Now, one of the problems that we had, and this is important, during the 2003 war in the Black community, 93% of the people opposed it. Well, how did they deal with that? Barack Obama, they dragged them all into the pro-war mold. And I think it's that is a critical, because it's such an important voting bloc for the Democratic Party, and because the Democratic Party is such a pro-war party now, I think it's critical to address that issue. Paul Robeson has a very deep legacy in the Black community, highly respected. However, just like Martin Luther King, his history has been rewritten. So all of this, anti-war stuff and not being anti-Russian stuff was kind of, written out of the story. So what I had proposed was working to rebuild the legacy of Paul Robeson in the Black community, but rather than just Paul Robeson and there's a picture of him and it usually says something like actor, lawyer, spoke a bunch of languages, and that's all Black people are allowed to know about him. We're not allowed to know, or it's not much more promoted, to relaunch his legacy, since people already know who he is, from the perspective of his anti-war work, from the perspective of his anti-colonialism work, his anti-imperialism work, things of that nature, and now relaunch that in a way that connects Russian people, who a lot of don't know who he is, but find that as a connection between the Russians and the Black community, so that it can kind of bring the Black community out of this brainwashed anti-Russian thought process that the Democratic Party has injected into their constituency in general. And I think that would be powerful, because that voting bloc if they are able to wake up and understand that their legacy is not a pro-war legacy, their legacy is an anti-war legacy. The legacy of their heroes is not only pro-war, but was in opposition to, very specifically fought against nuclear war with Russia. I think that would be something very important to do, and I think that's some work that I'm proposing that should be put forward. And since I do travel back and forth to Russia, hopefully I'll be going again in another month or two. That's something that I could work on.
That's excellent. No, thank you for that. I think that's an interesting insight. I see Dennis Small, you have your hand raised.
I wanted to add one thought on this question of the Epstein matter. And I think it speaks directly to this issue of the need for a cultural renaissance broadly in the population as a whole, because the put the Epstein revelations together with what is widely discussed as the role of the surveillance state. I think a lot of people, when they see the Epstein revelations, look over their own shoulder and say, uh-oh. Not that they were necessarily involved with Epstein too, but because of the mass addiction of the population to drugs, the mass addiction to gambling, and the mass addiction to pornography, since the vast majority of what happens on the internet is pornographic, emphatically including most of the leading TV news shows, but really pornography. I think there is a real element of control of the population involved in this thing with Epstein. Just look at Congress. I mean, the big problem with Congress is that J. Edgar Hoover has a file on each of them. Oops, not J. Edgar Hoover, but the followers of J. Edgar Hoover. In those days, it just wasn't done with the same high sophisticated technology, digital technologies, and so on. It was pictures and paper files and so on and so forth. But there's a huge element of control. And in fact, one of the things that's come out around the Epstein question is that nobody really could get a start and go anywhere unless they were caught on film or, deliberately induced on film so that there was blackmail evidence against them. But I think there's a broad population effect in this whole thing too. And it begs the issue of the kind of mental hygiene that's required, especially of political organizers, but in the population more broadly. And that's a question of the issue of what Helga was throwing out as an idea of, well, maybe we should have not only a security and a development, but a cultural new architecture as well, because that's what's needed. Often in organizing in Ibero-America and talking to people there, I have a very simple recommendation to them. Don't do anything that you don't want to see yourself on a videotape doing, because it's going to happen. Just don't do it. That's all. And I think that this raises the issue where the Epstein files and the so-called surveillance state come together is the issue of what actually should proper mental hygiene be. And that's a cultural question before anything else.
Let me really quick, and this is critical, but based on what you said, this is critical. And this is why I say we have tidbits of information here. So I started just doing a little bit of investigation. Let me read something to you. And I guarantee that in what's missing in the Epstein files, this is there. Christine Maxwell, twin sister of Ghislaine Maxwell, co-founded Magellan, one of the first internet search engines in the early 1990s, alongside her twin sister, Isabel Maxwell, and their husbands. That was funded by Bill Gates, I might add. The company, initially launched as the McKinley Group in '93, evolved into Magellan, a pioneering web directory with a rating system, and was sold to Excite in 1996. After Magellan, Christine co-founded Chiliad, a data analysis company based in Herndon, Virginia. Chiliad specialized in natural language search technologies and intelligent mining of structured and unstructured data, and its software was used by the FBI's counterterrorism data warehouse post 9/11, raising concerns about data sovereignty and intelligence connections. So, what's not being discussed now is that there are other Maxwells, that they are funded by Bill Gates, and that they created the software that's being used by ICE, that's being used by FBI. You see what I mean? The doors are open. Now, when that happens, You know that stuff's not in there. So now if I start working this and write this up and put this out on my Substack, people are going to look at, they're going to say, holy moly. So that's why I say the doors are being opened here for us. And as you said, this is a perfect example for us to say, yes, people are concerned about this and they're looking at this ice. Well, guess where they got their software from? Ghislaine Maxwell's sister.
That's a great point.
Just
Go
don't
ahead,
tell me
Dennis.
they're the ones who also came up with Maxwell House coffee and they're little that would be just too much.
Well, I think we can overlook that because Maxwell House coffee is not
That's
too bad. I
really
can drink
Not the best part of waking up.
Yeah.
Helga, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, but what this also brings up is what is wrong with the entire system, because very early on I sort of observed how things were organized, and I came to the conclusion that you do not make a real career in this system if you cannot prove that you have at least 2 corpses in the closet, because only then you are reliable. And that was emphatically confirmed to me, especially in 1990, when I was traveling in several European countries with the idea that there should be a productive triangle. This was the predecessor to the Eurasian land bridge. And, Lynn had anticipated that the wall would come down, that Germany would be unified, and had proposed this idea of connecting the region between Paris, Berlin, and Vienna, which is the size of territory of Japan, to prolong that very highly industrialized area through development corridors to the east, to Warsaw, to Kiev, to Moscow, to the Balkans. In any case, we had a plan of what to do in the moment when the Comic-Con went bankrupt. And so I took this project, this program of the so-called productive triangle, and I traveled through many countries. And again, people said, no, what you're saying is no good because, you need to have corruption. I said, no, we want to get rid of corruption. And I said, no, corruption is extremely important because only if you have corrupt people can you rely on them. If there are people who are refusing to be corrupt, they can do anything they want to, and you have no control over them. And I think if you look at it, how the political structure is organized, that, to get a post in the party system in Europe or in the United States, to get a seat as a congressional office or funded by, you need basically to prove that you are corrupt, that you take this money, and that way you are part of the system. If you say things which are other than what is the established code of behavior in that particular club, they do not let you grow. So the whole system is based on exactly this kind of corruption. And, what we see now with the Epstein case is simply the gutter of this whole system comes out in the open.
Absolutely. Oh my God, Helga, I wish we could have a book of your life because some of these stories are just absolutely amazing and I always enjoy learning from them. But yeah, I wish we could have all of these stories outlined. I hope we get the opportunity to do that at some point. Well, let me see. Is there anything else that people have thoughts on? Otherwise, we'll continue to the final item for the agenda. Okay. Oh, Dennis?
No.
Okay. So otherwise, so we have an interview that was just done with President Donald Ramotar, and EIR is posting it up on their YouTube channel. I think it's up on the website already, eir.news. Dennis Small has a clip and he's going to introduce it. Please go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, just very briefly, this is an interview that, excuse me, I conducted with President Ramotar, who is very familiar to most of you from the IPC meetings. This was conducted on February 3rd, 2 days before the end of the New START treaty, and the interview centered on that. And this is just an opening clip of a minute or two. As Anastasia was saying, we are in EIR conducting a whole series of interviews, 3-4 a week. In fact, another one we just conducted this week was with Garland Nixon, partially on the Epstein question and other matters. And this is a new special feature of our publication, which is being made available. I'm going to send you in the chat as soon as the clip from Ramatar is over, the link to that, and then you can subscribe to the channel altogether and get these interviews as they are released. So go right ahead with the clip, please. From the outset, what is your view on this question of the New START treaty coming to the end of the line 48 hours from right now?
The danger that exists for such a global catastrophe far outstrips the mass consciousness of the people of the world as a whole. The consciousness is lagging behind the danger. And that is why I think what you are doing in your organization and in the EIR that you produce, it's so very important to try to lift the awareness of people and on the danger. So every country, I believe, got a right to expect that they should have security, and then therefore we should start building, having measures, activities that will build trust. And the first step in that direction is to begin talking to each other, to understanding each other's positions, their fears, their concern, and then look for cooperation. You mentioned at the beginning too, one of the ideas that is coming out of the LaRouche movement organization is this land bridge across from Russia to the United States and connecting the continents of Europe and the whole of the Americas. And some of these type of projects, which would be enormously expensive, and we would be able to get them much faster if we have cooperation with each other.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Small from.
All right, great. Thank you for.
I just put the link in the chat for people to take a look at.
Excellent. Okay, so people definitely check that out. It's very relevant for what's happening right now in the world. And also consider subscribing to the Executive Intelligence Review Daily Alert to get these updates on what's actually happening in the world. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to transfer over to the discussion period. If you are on over any of the broadcasting channels and you'd like to participate in the Zoom meeting and be part of the discussion with the panelists, you must be registered. You can either go to the YouTube, underneath the YouTube description, there is the RSVP link there, or you can go to schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the website is the RSVP link. Just sign up there and you'll be emailed the Zoom link to hop on. And with that, Dave, just let me know when we've cut the stream. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.